Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Quorum Podcast. This is where academic medicine meets remote, austere, and resource-limited areas. Welcome back to the program. This is Aebhric. This week, I am with Darren Torpey. Darren is one of our paramedic graduates. He is a Winchman on Sikorsky 118 out of Sligo, and he's a paramedic, an advanced paramedic on the helicopter there. We're going to hear a bit about that. But Darren, welcome to the program.
Hi, Aebhric. Thanks very much. Very happy to be invited on, and I'm glad to be here to have a chat with you.
I've been meaning to get in your hair for ages, but it's so nice to nail you down.
Well, here we are.
Here we are. Tell us a bit about yourself.
So yeah, as you know, we've probably been connected for a number of years now, but just some background info for everyone listening. I work in Ireland. I'm employed by a CHC, who's an international helicopter company. We are on contract to the Irish Coast Guard, providing search and rescue and a kind of a HEMS service. So I'm based in Sligo. I've been doing this job this is my 17th year doing this job. But previous to that, I was in the Dublin Fire Brigade. I was a firefighter paramedic for a number of years. And then previous to that, I was in the Irish Defence Forces. So I kind of had an interesting route through to get to this job. But yeah, so that's where I am today, working in Sligo.
So you started out in the military. What was your job on that?
So yeah, I signed up initially. I was 20 years of age. I joined an infantry unit in the Irish Army, trained for 6 months, and probably within that first year, I had an opportunity to apply for a course that took me out of the Army and into the Irish Air Corps, still in the Defence Forces in Ireland, but just a different branch. That got me into a flying role, and I did that for between the two roles just under 5 years before leaving to join the Fire Brigade.
So it was a natural transition for you to do this as a civilian. Were you doing the same thing on the 139s, don't they have?
They have 139s now. So I actually had a fixed wing role. I was what we'd call a radar operator on a maritime patrol aircraft, fisheries and customs, and some top cover, search and rescue top cover roles. So I did fly. I didn't get across into the helicopter jobs before I actually got a job offer to join the fire service. So my intention, probably since before leaving school, was to end up doing search and rescue as a helicopter winchman, and I targeted everything to try and get there, but at the time they had ceased doing search and rescue in the Air Corps, so I took the opportunity to branch off into the fire service. Little did I know at the time that would also lead me back into flying with the Coast Guard. So
you meant to do this from the very beginning, like you set out your whole pathway on being a winchman.
Yeah, I think I was probably maybe 2 or 3 years left in my in school. And I had, I believe at the time it was a textbook in school, had some photographs of, it would have been an Irish Air Corps Dolphin involved in a search and rescue mission. And I remember looking at that at the time thinking, I would really like to do a job like that. And I can always link right back to that moment looking at that book. And I kind of figured that's something that I'd like to do. So I think subconsciously at the time, and then actively as I got a bit older, I aimed my kind of career path at jobs, or directly at that job, or stuff that would help beef up my CV to get where I wanted to be. And I'm very fortunate that I did get there, and I had a lot of help along the way. But yeah, when you sit down and think about it, it's been quite a journey.
It's fascinating that you saw that at that age, and you just kept at it. The tenacity of going after your dream.
Yeah, I think when you say it like that, it does sound very. It is essentially what I did. I did have a number of doors closed, in my face almost throughout that journey. But I suppose a little bit of stubbornness, and I just always figured if you really wanted something bad enough, and there's a way to do it, or an obstacle in your way, get over it, get around it, do whatever you need to do. And it's easy to say that now. I had no idea that it would work, and I'm very grateful that it did, and I wouldn't change a thing because I love what I do.
Yeah, fair play to you. So you got out of the Defence Forces and went to Dublin Fire Brigade.
I did, and for those that are aware, obviously Dublin Fire Brigade, it would probably be the largest full-time fire service in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland. But it also has an integral to the service is an ambulance service. So they have all firefighters are trained to minimum FEC paramedic standards, and then a number of people go off to be advanced paramedics. So they have emergency ambulances based in fire stations throughout Dublin City. So I was lucky enough to get recruited and trained with the Dublin Fire Brigade, and I operated as a firefighter paramedic for just under 2 years, which I really, really enjoyed. Saw a lot in the short time I was there. It was a wonderful service, great service, and a great job.
So you did the paramedic with them, the FEC paramedic. How long was that?
Yeah, so in your basic training, you do branch off from the fire ground and do your classroom FEC paramedic. Back then, it was a lot shorter than it is now, the classroom element. And then once you finish your firefighter training, you go on the road and then you do your internship. It took about a year and a half from start to finish, starting the classroom and finishing with the FEC paramedic license. And throughout that time, you're combined between your fire and your ambulance duties, and then the ambulance side obviously has your portfolios and your ride-alongs and your hospital placements and so on, and then your exams. So yeah, it's a busy few years.
Were you trying to get into the advanced paramedic role?
I did. That was my first time to really see, hear, and experience what advanced paramedics were capable of. Some of our tutors and that initial classroom paramedic training were advanced paramedics. That would have been 2005. So I think at that time the AP program, obviously it was on the road, but it was probably in the earlier days. So I wouldn't have known much about it until that time. And I kind of, a bit like seeing that thing in the textbook when I was in school, I kind of looked at that role and went, that definitely interests me. I didn't feel at the time, or I suppose a better way to explain it is, at the time I realized I probably had a lot of stuff to experience before I would be ready for that role. But I did put it there on my vision board, I think is a phrase I've heard used. And I put it at the back of my mind, and I thought, yes, that would be something I'd like to try.
Did you put in to get the AP training?
Because my time in the fire service was so short, I would never have had the length of service to have been selected. As in, I wouldn't have been there long enough even to have been considered for that role. I would have probably needed, and I think it makes a lot of sense, I would have needed a lot more on the road experience before I would have been in a position to probably move forward into the AP training program. But I obviously got recruited by CHC, as it was in 2007. And at that time, there was no advanced paramedics in the Coast Guard. So I accepted that my new role was as an aviator who also had a paramedic license, and the thoughts of progression and upskilling to AP kind of just went on the back burner, I guess, for a long time. There was a new role to learn, and I wouldn't say master, but there was a new role to get to grips with, and I gave that my time and attention for the length of time it took to get fully trained up and experienced.
So you were a FEC paramedic, and can you tell the listeners the difference between a FEC paramedic and then a FEC advanced paramedic?
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially there's a lot of differences, and a lot of it doesn't really transfer directly to other services or other regions of the world, but essentially a FEC paramedic is a non-ALS paramedic. So a FEC paramedic can do quite a lot, but they're not allowed to cannulate. They don't intubate. Any interventions or any pharmacological stuff would generally be done through the oral route, intranasal, buccal, or intramuscular. In terms of the advanced paramedic, they would then have the add-on, what I'd call the ALS skills. It's probably the simplest way. Intubation, cannulation, intraosseous access. As an AP, then you have access to more pain relief options in terms of IV morphine, intravenous fentanyl, ketamine, intranasal fentanyl. Things obviously over the years, more and more drugs have been added on. As a Coast Guard FEC paramedic, we're probably the only paramedics that I'm aware of in the state who can give morphine intramuscularly for remote and austere patients that are injured in remote areas, because we don't have, if you're a FEC paramedic in the Coast Guard, you don't have the option to call for an advanced paramedic to arrive in an ambulance or a fire appliance.
Right.
So sometimes you do find that you're a little bit exposed, but if you have an advanced paramedic as part of your crew, well then obviously, if appropriate, those treatments and medications are available.
So the advanced paramedic can intubate, but they can't RSI, is that right?
No, you're correct. So to RSI somebody, it would be above the scope of a FEC advanced paramedic. And as I said, there is progression within the grades, all the grades. There's an EMT grade below the paramedic grade. They all do progress every number of years. So currently, there's a new round of clinical practice guidelines for 2021, which have been revised in 2022. I have not yet been upskilled, but in there is a procedural sedation guideline. It's available on FEC website if anybody wanted to look it up. But it does give you a number of options to deal with maybe an agitated patient or a difficult airway patient. It wouldn't be an RSI, but it would be a step below that. And we're fortunate in Ireland to have medical support or medical oversight, as it might have been called in the past. So any practitioner of any grade can make a phone call, either mobile phone or through a radio system we use here, where you can speak to a doctor in a university, Cork University Hospital. So you can look for guidance. You can even look for increased medication, increased dosages that might be above your scope of practice for any number of unusual situations that you encounter. So yes, you have a guideline, and yes, you have your own scope, but you have the option to speak to a clinician who can then authorize essentially or support you in making different interventions.
Plus, there's pre-hospital doctors who can support you and arrive on scene and do the RSI. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. Personally, myself, I've not been on a call where I've assisted or I've been involved in an RSI, but our service, our aircraft, absolutely. Just in the last year, was involved in a call with a young lady who ended up being RSI'd by a doctor, a community responding doctor, a hospital consultant doctor who she was volunteering in her own time, and they did RSI a young lady and transported her for definitive care on the aircraft. So it is available. It's hit and miss, but it's definitely a feature we'd probably see more of going forward as there's more and more of these doctors given their time. So
yeah, they enhance things a bit. We have the South Dock in Carsavine in Kerry, and they're available to do some of the advanced care. But if they're they're half an hour one direction away, they're not going to get to you very quickly.
True. Yeah. No. As I said, it does come down to circumstance, time and place, and yeah, when they're there and they're available, and if they can get to you, wow, yeah, what a range of skills to have. Would definitely make certain situations a lot easier.
When I first moved to Carsavine ages ago, there wasn't even an AP. There was just a FEC basic paramedic, and the closest AP was Killarney, which was an hour away. And that it was a bit scary thinking about having a femur fracture or something where it wouldn't have much help until the doc had come. But that improved things since then.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And again, because the scope of practice for the paramedics and the APs particularly have increased, there's just more options. There'll always be those situations where you're going to find that you either don't have the right practitioner or they are on the way, but they're the travel time might be extended. So yeah, I guess that's part of being a pre-hospital practitioner. You have to make do with what you have, and if you can get something better without a big delay, then yeah, fight for it.
That's the challenge. So Darren, you were a Winchman, and so you are a FEC paramedic, which is a BLS level paramedic, and you wanted more. So you came to us in Pretty Bay, Malta, to get our paramedic program. Tell us what you're looking for. Did you look around for other options? Did you look to the UK to get their ACPC paramedic, or what was your thinking at the time?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, and I'll say this now, I was very grateful when I got in contact with you and we spoke back it must have been 2017, 2016, I think it might have been.
I think it was, yeah.
So basically, I had identified a need. I suppose at that stage, I'd been 9-10 years in the Coast Guard, and I had figured I might maybe revisit this whole progression of my clinical grade, whether it be to AP or as in Irish AP, or look at maybe HCPC. So I had completed a degree here, a paramedic degree. My initial paramedic training would have been diploma level through the Royal College of Surgeons. I figured I might look at a degree, but I didn't want to give up my full-time role because I'd wanted this job forever. So I couldn't ever do something full-time, like join a service in a jurisdiction that would train me. I had to do it myself. So I kind of figured out what I needed to do, and again, FEC. And I did speak to them. They were helpful. They have their scope of practice, and basically they said that's the standard. That's exactly what's involved. So I kind of bespoke, tailored. How do I get to that level? How will I navigate there myself? I did a bit of research. I looked online. I had a few different places. I think there was somewhere, was it Denmark or Sweden? I can't remember, to be honest. And then I got in touch with yourself, and I think from there the doors opened for me. I had identified your course would hit nearly all of the elements I needed to cover to aim at the HCPC paramedic grade. I decided that's going to be the tester. I'll see, can I do that? And I went to Malta, had a great time, learned a lot. There was a lot of stuff there. You obviously have a remote. A lot of the stuff around your course at the time was built on the idea of being remote, which kind of ties in with my Coast Guard role. Sometimes you can be quite isolated. So it was good. It was pitched at my level, I felt. So yeah, we had a few weeks there, and I graduated from your course, and that was the basis of my application to the HCPC, which thankfully was successful.
So you got ALS, the ACPC paramedic rating in the UK. So you could have gotten a job in the UK right off the bat, but you wouldn't have been on the rescue Sikorsky's, would you?
No, I mean, yes. So getting the UK paramedic registration was, to me, was a real benchmark. I was like, wow, I'm actually here. So I guess on a personal level, a professional level, I was like, oh, I actually, and I could have with my FEC license, but it would have opened doors a little easier. A lot of jobs, whether it be in the Gulf states or in the UK, obviously, HCPC paramedic was a kind of a recognised grade there. Yes, within the UK system, they have Coast Guard aircraft. They are similar aircraft actually, but also it's a similar setup. It's a private company contracted to the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency in the UK, and they recruit HCPC, or not recruit. Their aircraft are crewed with HCPC registered SAR winch-men and winch-women. So I all of a sudden realized, okay, now I have more options here for my career path. And yeah, it just felt great. It felt all of a sudden I realized actually this could work. And of course, me being a little bit, not greedy is not the right word. I had set my sights even higher again and went, well, if I can get that, why can't I look at maybe going back and revisiting the AP thing? Because it had been there in the back of my mind all along. And a lot of my friends and colleagues who would have joined ambulance services, I suppose in the National Ambulance Service in Ireland, they'd come in. I had sat down with people, had cups of coffee, and they asked about how to train to be a paramedic. I helped them a lot on the path of applying, and then when they got into training and completed their training, they graduated as paramedics, and then they'd gone on to be APs, and I kind of felt a little bit like, oh, there was an itch there that needed to be scratched, I think. So I think having obtained the HCPC registration, I then looked at trying to turn everything on my CV and approach FEC and see could I climb that mountain.
So they had a process in place where you could get your advanced paramedic using your HCPC registration and your training with us down in Malta.
Yeah, so I guess I have no criticism at all towards anybody that has helped me along the way. But one thing I did feel initially when I started looking at the FEC process was it was very black and white. It didn't, which is great. The bar is set. There's a standard, and everybody has to attain it, or they don't. But it didn't allow a lot of wiggle room for somebody who came with I suppose, a career path or a CV or a list of qualifications that didn't fit the way that other people would have approached it, whether it be through the Dublin Fire Brigade system or the National Ambulance Service in Ireland, or they'd come from another service abroad where they had significant on the road time. A lot of the metrics where they measured your experience was based on ambulance time, road ambulance time. And because a lot of my time, I had spent time, even since I joined the Coast Guard, I had spent a lot of time over the years working with private ambulance companies doing emergency work, and other services where I'd actually spent a lot of time doing event cover. I had a lot of experience, but on paper it didn't quite fit their scoring criteria. So initially, when I did approach them, my initial application failed. I was informed in writing that I had met the educational requirements, and a lot of that was down to the course I'd done in Malta with yourself. The course information form that you were very, very helpful with at the time, covering all the topics and lectures and hours and everything, all that. It was tedious at the time, but all that in paperwork, when you put it in, it met their educational requirements based on other courses at the degree and all that. It all helped. But the key one for me was the course in Malta, which led to the HCPC. Those were quite weighted in my application. But I fell short on what they termed as clinical experience. They didn't recognize my time on Coast Guard aircraft as approved placements. It wasn't what they were used to, essentially, I think. And they gave me a letter which detailed what I needed to do, which was great. They gave me 3 years to achieve it. So I set about getting experience and I suppose my CPD over those 3 years was sufficient enough for them to then, when I reapproached them, just at the start of this year, they revisited my application and granted me the NQEMT AP, which was my AP qualification. So that was a proud day. Won't lie.
Well earned indeed. And the AP is a master's level qualification, isn't it?
I think when you look at the Irish national framework, it is at level 8. Yes. So the standard the standard approach would, the majority of people in Ireland would do the Remote Paramedic as a member of the National Alumnus Service, which has now gone to degree level, actually, interestingly. But previous to that, they would do their paramedic course as part of their service. So they'd be in the service and they would train them within the service as a uniform member. And then they, after a period of time, would apply to and complete the AP program, which took, I think, about 18 months, depending on how people got through the program. And then they would graduate from UCD, University College Dublin, with the NQEMT AP, which was, and I'm open to correction here, I don't think it was initially a master's program, but the program is now on the framework at level 8. So yes, I was granted equivalency to that qualification.
Nice.
Based on what I'd done myself outside.
Have you thought about going back and getting a full master's degree somewhere?
I have, but I think my wife would probably chop my head off. So the last 3 years, life has been busy at home. We've had a few new additions to family, and I had a lot of leeway. I'm very, very grateful to my wife and my family for the support I had to go and build up my CPD portfolio, because it did involve a lot of heads in and time where I was focused on it and not so much focused on being at home. So I think for now, I can't say that I won't in the future. I'll have to keep an eye on the Quorum website. But yeah, every now and then I get the urge to look at something else. But I think what I've actually done at the moment is I'm circling the wagon a little bit, and I'm focusing on getting comfortable with this new grade. I got my AP in June, so I've been operational within the Coast Guard service as an AP since July. So it's still, I'm still treating myself as very much new to the grade. So I'm just going to focus on that for a while.
Nice. So tell us what you do. What's your day to day? What are you doing with your paramedic training, and what is part of it is Winchman, part of it is medical. So tell us a bit about what you're doing.
Yeah. So our job, I consider my job to be quite interesting. And if there's anybody I work with listening, they'll sit there laughing, because they'll think that I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. Because like everybody in a job, when you've been in it for a while, sometimes it can feel a little bit like a job, where it can be a bit sameish. But our job is generally fairly varied. So in Sligo, where I'm based, I would do a 24-hour shift cycle. So when I start work, I come in and I'm basically on the base from about 12:30 in the afternoon to start my shift at 1300. So we start a shift. There's 6 of us on duty. This is just background info. There's 6 of us on shift. We'll have 2 pilots. There'll be 2 what we call SAR crew, or technical crew. One will be the duty winch operator. One will be the duty winch man. You'll have 2 engineers who look after all the maintenance requirements, and it's their aircraft. We get the loan of the aircraft from them to do what we need to do. So we're on shift until basically 1300 the next day. And as a crew, we'll come on shift. We'll do our daily checks. So there's aircraft equipment checks to be done. There's hoist checks. There's a lot of checks. So I wouldn't go into the massive detail. There's just a lot of checks to do. It takes maybe an hour or so. If you're the duty winch man, from a clinical point of view, you take a handover from the off-going crew. Everybody will do that. You'll go in and you'll sign for your controlled drugs in conjunction with the off-going guy. You'll sign them in. You'll witness them. You'll check them. You'll sign them out. He'll witness them. Those drugs are taken. They're secured on the aircraft. And then we check our medical kit. And at any stage in that whole process, the phone can ring and you're out the door if you're tasked. Once the checks are done, we'll generally plan a training flight. One of my roles, so I would be dual rated. There'll be a number of us dual rated. So I'd be a winch operator as well as a winch man. And one of my secondary roles is I'm also an aircrew trainer. So I'm involved in training and checking of new crew and existing crew. There's periodical checks to be done on different elements of our training. So we come up with a training plan for the shift. But all that, I'll leave all that aside. Essentially, we'll go and we'll train as a crew at some stage during the shift. And we can be tasked at any time during that flight, before it, after it. And a lot of our missions, excuse me one second. A lot of our missions are, so when people think of a search and rescue helicopter, it has a hoist, but a lot of our missions, particularly in Sligo, we have a number of islands all along the west and northwest coast that have people living on offshore islands. They are communities. They're like every community, they have their medical issues, they're medical emergencies. So we can be quite busy sometimes during the summer, especially on the islands, with everything slips, trips, falls, your broad spectrum of medical problems. During COVID, we had a lot of obviously COVID type calls. So day and night, we're the ambulance service for those islands. If we're not doing one of those types of calls, it can be, as anybody can imagine, you can have people on ships, people on cliffs, people on mountains, missing people, high risk missing people. So the missions can vary, and we'll approach them all as a crew. And if we can get to somebody and help them, yeah, we'll absolutely do it. If we can do it safely, brilliant.
So you're doing some of the minor bits and bobs on these islands. You're going and transporting them because they can't get easily get on a boat and then get to the hospital. It takes ages. So you're basically doing transport for minor injuries. Are you doing majors as well?
Yeah, it can be answered. It's essentially, if you think of any call that you could have on an ambulance in a town or a rural area, we'll get that on the islands. We're very fortunate. A lot of our islands have a very good network of public health nurses. Some of them have GPs either on the islands or on call ashore to the nurse on the island. Some of our islands have they'll have an ambulance with community first responders or maybe EMT grades. So we'll arrive there. There'll nearly always be somebody there of some clinical level. We'll take a handover. And then obviously we'll assess our patients, we'll provide treatment as appropriate, and we'll take them to an appropriate centre. So some patients can be suitable to be transported off on a scheduled ferry. Some of them can be suitable to be taken off via the Royal National Lifeboat Institute. They're all-weather lifeboats. They can take people ashore to meet an ambulance on shore. Excuse me. And sometimes we'll be tasked. Particularly, like, it can be everything. It can be from your exacerbations of COPD to polytrauma, cardiac arrests, self-harm, anything involving drugs or substance abuse. We've, like, as I said, any ambulance service anywhere will see their daily diet of calls. We get just the same, births, deaths, the whole lot.
So you're based in Sligo. So does that mean you go to County Donegal? You do Clare. You do Mayo. Is that the area you're doing?
Yeah, so look, we're very fortunate. We've quite an extensive network. So the Irish Coast Guard have a service that has 4 helicopter bases. So they have a base in Dublin, Waterford, Shannon, and ourselves in Sligo. All bases have the Sikorsky S-92 aircraft currently. Excuse me. There will be a change in the next few years to a different aircraft type, but we have our patch, inverted commas, and in the Sligo base, we would consider from Clifton on the west coast of Ireland, so west of Galway and north of Galway Bay, from Clifton all the way around to Rathlin Island, which would be off the north coast, including a large section of Northern Ireland. We would kind of cover that patch of coastline. And you could probably, people are familiar with their Irish geography, you could join those two places to Athlone in the centre of Ireland, and that whole quadrant of Ireland would be our patch essentially. But any aircraft can respond if we're busy or if we're offline for a maintenance issue. Another aircraft can come into our patch, and our 4 aircraft are available to the National Ambulance Service also. We would have a HEMS, the best way to describe it. Our service is a search and rescue helicopter. We provide search and rescue to the Irish Coast Guard, but we're also licensed to provide HEMS. So basically what it means is we follow the rules, and we have a license to do HEMS missions, which are, the person doesn't need to be rescued, they need to be transported from A to B. So it comes under HEMS regulations. So we can do that when requested. They can either be hospital transfers, common calls, and those would be STEMIs would be pretty common, CVAs, AAAs, burns, amputations. They would, things that would be deemed time critical or unstable or unsuitable for road transfer. We could be requested to transport those patients with or without a medical team, depending on the level of the patient's needs. Or we can respond to the point of injury. We can be sent to meet a crew on the road with the patient, and we'd be guided to a landing site, and they'd be driving to meet us, or we can go directly to a point of injury. I was involved in one of those calls just yesterday, and we'll go directly to the scene, and we'll either transport the patient, or we can deploy our crew. We'd have a paramedic, 2 paramedics, or a paramedic and an AP, and we can get boots on the ground, assist and transport patients as required. So it's quite versatile, and what you can do on a shift can be quite varied. But there's a lot of, I suppose the service has a lot of capability, because you have 4 aircraft at any one time that can potentially do that. So you can put a lot of boots anywhere with a bit of time.
So a bit of search and rescue and a bit of HEMS. It's perfect.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be the way around. I mean, we could find that we're doing quite a lot of HEMS calls, but again, it's always a mix and it's always varied, which is nice. I like that.
So how often have you gone to Clare Island, which is a island off of Mayo, off of Westport? Is that in your remit?
It is Clare Island, yeah. That'd be one of our islands. Again, it's difficult to say. Some islands you feel like you're there every day, and sometimes you mightn't be there for quite a while. Clare Island would be very well served. There's a very good GP in Achill. She would spend a lot of time
Mm.
She would spend a lot of time traveling to Clare Island for jobs. Even when we're on the route, we'll hear the lifeboat launching with the doctor on board. So we'll see her there quite a bit. Um, but Clare Island, yeah, a lot of the islands, Clare Island being one of them, they'd have their own population. Some would be people that would be from the island who'd obviously live there and maybe work ashore, who take the ferry every day. You have people who just live on the island all the time. But in the summer period, the weather is, well, it's Irish weather, so it's not always nicer. When the rain is warmer, maybe you will end up with quite a lot of visitors to the island, so the population can increase quite a lot, and that brings its own
Mm.
level of business, I suppose, inverted commas, our way.
It does. I met the wife on the island, so I know it very well,
Ah,
and I'm sure you've landed right there at the quay to collect some business, as you say.
yes. Would you have been a tourist then? Could we class you as a tourist back then?
They called me a blow-in,
Oh,
and then I took one of theirs and ran, and so the wife isn't there anymore. But
okay.
um, yeah, it's rugged. In the wintertime, there's two different ferry services, and it's too rough. So I can see why it's helpful for yourselves to come in, pick up someone who might be pregnant with pain or something like that, and that she just can't wait for, or you just don't want to put her on the rough seas to go into Rona
Yeah,
to take him to the hospital. Yeah.
yeah, and we've seen both sides of it. I mean, there's times you can land at the landing site there beside the pier, and you can be transported to the other end of the island for a person who's fallen at home and they've maybe had a neck of femur or query pelvis fracture, and to move them back to the aircraft takes a bit of lateral thinking because the mechanism to transport them is a jeep or a van. So you're again, since I've gone into the AP grade, I'm quite I feel quite I'm very grateful actually is probably the best way to explain it, because now I can go, and if more pain relief is required than I would have been able to give before, I can think back to a few calls where, despite your best efforts, people were quite uncomfortable with that trip. Whereas now we're a little bit better equipped for those types of calls. But essentially, you're going to end up bringing that person back to the aircraft, and then all that moving is done. Once you've got them on board the aircraft, you don't need to move them again until they arrive at the hospital. So getting them into a
Mm.
ferry and bringing them across and getting them into an ambulance and then driving them for 40 minutes on a less than ideal road, versus flying them generally the way to go, I think, for those types.
Yeah, definitely, and even ketamine wouldn't really take the edge off if you're jostling them around in rough seas.
Yeah,
It's yeah.
yeah.
And are you mainly taking them to Castlebar Hospital, or is there a certain hospital you work out of?
So again, we're fortunate. We have in our patch, we'd have the hospitals we generally go to in our patch would be Letterkenny up to the north, Sligo Hospital, which is just beside us, Castlebar Hospital, and Galway University Hospital. They all have helipads that are available to us to take patients to. Depending on if I go to any scene, so take Clare Island as an example, depending on the nature of the issue. So, for example, if it's a cardiac issue or a query CVA, the STEMIs, if they're accepted to PCI, will go to Galway, assuming that the weather allows us to get there. Um, but if the person's suitable to go to Castlebar, we'll take them to Castlebar. Again, a feature of working offshore and working in aviation is the weather. The weather is a huge determining factor for what we can do. So yes, sometimes we could have a patient on Clare Island who absolutely needs to go to Hospital A. We're never going to get there due weather, so we're taking them hopefully to a hospital, but sometimes just back to our airport, and they'll have to go by road. We might have to make an
Mm.
instrument approach to get in quite poor weather into our airport, just to get them off the island and get them to somewhere where they can be seen. And I mean, we're fortunate as aircrew and clinicians that we can kind of we have a better idea than maybe our pilot colleagues of, we're going to go to Clare Island, but all of a sudden you do a 12-bit ECG and now we're not going to Castlebar because we're going to go to Galway. And sometimes there's an element of, when you're developing the plan to go to Clare Island and you've got some information initially already been tasked, 50-year-old male working in his backyard, developed chest pain, he's pale and sweaty. We're kind of sitting there thinking, okay, guys, just so you know, there's a good chance this guy could be end up going to PCI or could be going to Galway, versus the closer hospital in Castlebar. So we build that plan ourselves as a crew on the way to it, and then we see what we see, and then we.
So you mentioned IFR. Is this a 24-hour service?
So our service is what we call all-weather SAR. So we are. It's never SAR at all costs. That's a thing to maybe point out very early in this segment. We would basically be tasked to an incident, and if the weather is quite poor, obviously then we need to look at our options. So take your island scenario. Maybe it might be more suitable for that person to go by lifeboat to shore, because we could absolutely proceed to the scene. We might not get there, and the delay of us trying to get there and not getting there delays that person getting definitive care. So sometimes we'll say very early on, guys, maybe just get them moving. We'll come up with a plan. But yes, the aircraft we have is rated to fly IFR, and we have what we call a RIPS system, rotor ice protection. So helicopters don't like ice, and they don't fly too well when they get ice on the moving parts. So our moving parts have ice protection on them, and the engines have a mat or a mesh on the front. So basically, we can climb up into known icing conditions. Again, you will avoid it at all costs if you can. From an aviation point of view, if we need to go from A to B and we can't go low level because the weather's too poor, we'll just climb above the height of all the terrain around us, and we'll fly at a safe level, and then we'll descend down the other side. And again, because we work offshore, we can just go west or offshore of the islands, let down over the sea, and then use our radar and our sensors to approach the island visually. And we have night vision goggles and stuff as well, so we can do that on nighttime as well. So
nice.
We've a lot of in terms of, as I said, it's great having clinicians in the back, and it's great having a bag of drugs, and it's great having your skills and all that. But actually, all that stuff just sits, because the main aim is to get from A to B safely. So as a clinician, when you join our service, you're joining a new job. You're joining the job is to train as an air crewman, winchman, as it does be when you come in first, and you also have a paramedic license.
So are they 24-hour shifts, and how many calls do you have in a shift?
So yes, our shift pattern is a 24-hour shift pattern. So as I mentioned earlier, you would basically, you take over, you assume duty at 1300, albeit you can be there earlier, but you basically from 1300 you're it. And we will be on immediate readiness. So this is more of a service thing. So basically, when the phone rings, our aim is to be airborne and off the airport in 15 minutes. We'll be proceeding to the scene inside of 15 minutes. Sometimes it takes longer because you need to take fuel or you're waiting on more information, but that's the aim, and we're like that at this time of the year up till 2100. We are on immediate readiness. At 2100 until 0730 the next morning, we're on a 45-minute notice. So essentially, if we get a tasking, we aim to be airborne and proceeding within 45 minutes. From 0730, we're back on that 15-minute call until we finish at 1 o'clock. But obviously, the aircraft's available from 0730 right up to 2100 on that 15-minute notice. In the summertime, that tweaks a little bit. The 15 minutes continues on till 10 p.m., not 9, just because obviously it's brighter that little bit later, and there's still a lot more people out. So we try and increase the cover a little bit in the winter months. Sorry, the summer months. Apologies.
And how many calls do you have per shift?
Sorry, yeah. So shifts, it's impossible. It's a bit like an ambulance. How many calls a shift? So last year, obviously the stats were just done. I think we ended up last year with, I'd have to check. I think we had about 290 calls last year, 180, 290 calls. So you could do a shift with no calls. You could do a run of shifts with no calls, or you could do a shift where you maybe do 4 calls in a shift. That might necessarily be in the summer. That could be in the winter time. So again, you've very little daylight, so a lot of that can be done during the hours of darkness or in daytime, but in poor weather. So, an ambulance call can take as long as it takes, but in our job, tasking, getting airborne, getting on scene, assessing the patient, treating the patient, transporting them at the hospital, handing over, in the aircraft, get back to base, debrief, restock. Like one call could take, quite a lot of your afternoon. So to do 2 or 3 in an afternoon, you can sometimes arrive into work, like any job. This isn't a complaint, it's just a fact of life. We can arrive into work at 20 past 12 to get in early, and the phone is ringing as you walk in the door, and you mightn't get back till 10 o'clock that night. So thankfully that's rare, but yeah, you take the good with the bad. It can be busy, it can be quiet. So
you're definitely working in prolonged casualty care. So what's the longest you've ever had a casualty for?
Yeah, funny. I was thinking about this before we started this, and I can think back about 2016. I think it was. We were sent to. So we got a call. Paint the scene. we were on that 45-minute call at night. At 10 p.m., we got a request from the Coast Guard. There was a chap had been stabbed on a vessel. They were well beyond our range at that stage. And it had been an altercation on board the vessel. One chap had a single stab wound to his upper left chest. He was initially unresponsive, is what we were told. We assembled, obviously, because when you're on that on-call period, some people can be, if they live nearby, can be gone home if they live within 20 minutes. So we reassembled and we basically had a chat. I spoke to the Coast Guard and I basically said, look, do we think that this person is alive? Is this a fatal stabbing? And they said, no, he's now conscious. That ship would have been speaking to a doctor on shore, this medical oversight, or medico as it's known as. They were being given some advice and getting some information, and that was being fed through to the Coast Guard, fed it through to us. So basically it sounded like this chap, after maybe an hour and a half after being stabbed, he was conscious, he was alert. So we thought, okay, we need to look at this. And we planned that we could reach him at about 5 o'clock the next morning. So again, we're still on our base, that person's still injured, they're quite a long way offshore. We got airborne, probably, I think it was about maybe 2 o'clock in the morning from our base, proceeded west, took some fuel in Blacksod. We met that vessel around 5 a.m. at first light. That guy was assessed on board, sucking chest wound, upper left-hand side. The knife was seen, it was a decent-sized knife, with a kitchen knife, probably maybe 5 inches. So we took that patient on board, and we flew him back 2 hours back to hospital. We were both paramedics working at the paramedic scope of practice at the time. He was hypotensive and quite agitated. We had a hard time. We had a hard time managing him, I think, for a while. We spoke to that medical oversight via satellite phone on the way in and basically said, look, we're tired. We've been up all night. This is what we have. Can somebody just with a clearer head than us just make sure we're not missing something here? They just said maybe I think the advice at the time was take the dressing off just to make sure that it wasn't tensioned, which it wasn't. It had a valve integral to the device. But eventually the patient just got so agitated to the point where he set up, and actually at that point a lot of blood came out through that open wound since the dressing had been removed. And at that point he became quite calm, and I was thinking peri-arrest at the time, but as it was, we landed in the hospital, I think sometime around 7:20 in the morning, 7:30 in the morning. We were met by an advanced paramedic.
Wow.
Who the first thing they did was got access. He had a fluid bolus, took him off the aircraft, and I remember sitting there at the time feeling quite frustrated. But I guess at the time we knew we did what we could do. But also we sat back and looked at it. I actually when I went into my degree, I did a research proposal on that call. I looked at treatment options, and I guess this permissive hypotension and prevention of coagulopathy was one of the things that I guess that man had held his own for that length of time, and fluid resuscitation would have probably been detrimental to him at the time. But I learned a lot post that call when I started doing my research, when I started, I guess, increasing my knowledge base. So, but yes, to answer the question, that was quite, I suppose we had that patient for upwards of maybe 2.5 hours, which wouldn't be a world record compared to some of your delegates would have people for days. But, here I am crying about it. But just from our point of view, that would probably be one of the longer calls. And we have had an incident, a chap on a vessel. I was not involved, but our crewman got on the vessel. Man had a query CVA, agitated, and our crewman ended up being on that vessel for a day and a half, because every time they attempted to,
Wow.
the aircraft had obviously to return to shore for fuel. I think it was like an hour 45 transit each way. So my colleague ended up on that boat for I think a day and a half, and they had a number of attempts to try and buccal and intranasal using midazolam to try and calm that man, or I wouldn't say sedate him, but they tried to definitely reduce his level of consciousness just to make him safe to transport, and I think it took quite a lot of time for that to happen. And I think not being there and absolutely not getting into somebody else's lane, I think having access to IV medication for calls like that is definitely the way forward. So the use of advanced paramedics in our service, it's a slow burner. It's not a service requirement. The service requirement is that a paramedic is on board that aircraft. Having an advanced paramedic is something that CHC, my employers, who have been very supportive, they've introduced that themselves. Basically, we've recruited people who have had advanced paramedic qualifications, and after their probation, a program was brought in to introduce them to operate at their level. So it's kind of been driven from the tail as opposed to the dog.
It's definitely needed, isn't it?
There's definitely there is a place for it. I do think so. Yeah. I've been on both sides now, and I can see, I know what I'd rather be doing. When it counts, it's good to have the options.
Darren, my final question for you is this. What advice would you have for a paramedic who would want to become a search and rescue paramedic such as yourself?
Yeah, we did an exercise a few days ago. We landed with a class of degree paramedic students in Derry in Northern Ireland, and I was asked that question. So the requirements in my service, and again, this is all going to change, and you have to be an Irish FEC paramedic in order to have an opportunity to go forward for this job. So anybody that's not in Ireland who's thinking of coming here or thinking of doing this job, the first step on the ladder is to apply to FEC, get your FEC paramedic or advanced paramedic if you were at that level. Without that, you could be absolutely suitable for the job and capable of passing the selection, but if you don't have that license, you don't get past step one. So that's the first thing I'd say. The other thing is, and maybe from my own experience, I would not like to come into this job with low hours on the road. I think having the requirement actually is you need to be registered as a paramedic for 2 years to apply for our selection process. But I would say that would want to be 2 very busy years. I'd say between 3 to 5 years of on the road experience as a paramedic would be a good standard. So I'd say have a bit of experience. It's also good to have a bit of life experience, but we don't often. So sometimes you could actually go for quite a while without seeing a patient, and sometimes when you get a really sick patient, it could have been quite a while. And having a bit of experience to fall back on, I think is only a good thing. But in terms of setting your sights like I did, you'd need to be the Irish FEC paramedic. Our company, when they advertise, they put people through a selection test. So it's basically fitness based and water confidence based. So you need to have a good level of physical fitness. You need to be comfortable in water. You don't need to be an Olympic swimmer, but you definitely need to be comfortable in water and comfortable in rough water. The other things then are it's aptitude. So it's somebody that has an aptitude to be an air crewman. So there's a psychometric testing involved and things like that. But again, you can't really prepare for them. Just to be aware that that's part of the process. And I think what's always advantageous to people is to have some type of experience outside of being a paramedic. We've people from all kind of backgrounds, mountain rescue backgrounds, people that volunteer for the likes of the Red Cross. We've a couple of people that are involved in dive recovery teams. So somebody that has just an overall appreciation for the search and rescue environment, not necessarily from a helicopter point of view. I mean, our new joiners, our ab initio crewmen, they don't have any flying experience. We train them for that. But yeah, I'd say that a bit of experience, some other interests if you're into hill walking or something outdoorsy, definitely helps people get through the selection process. And I think once they arrive on a mountain with somebody who's hurt, they actually automatically have an appreciation for how that person ended up where they are and how easily it can happen to anyone.
Darren, I've been looking forward to this talk for ages, and I really appreciate your time to chat with us this evening. And I would like very much to see you down in Malta, maybe doing a master's program, the Masters of Austere Critical Care, or just let me know if there's any other way that we can support what you're doing.
That'd be great. I'd like to say it again on the record. You've absolutely been instrumental in helping me. I've been very fortunate to get to where I was, to where I am. It's been through good people helping out all the time, and I'd say that to anybody else who's thinking of doing either of the things that we've talked about. Ask for help, reach out. Information is power. Find out what it takes. Talk to people who've done it. And you've been instrumental for me, Aebhric. So, and you and everyone at the college. So, yeah, I'd love to go back. I'd love to go to see Malta again. So again, appreciate everything you've done, and you're still doing it. So
this has been a presentation from the College of Remote and Offshore Medicine. If you would like to earn CPD credits for this podcast, you can join the Council of Members. Being a member of the college gives you free CPD credit, free access to our virtual field guide, and discounts on our e-learning courses. You can join the team on our college website at quorum.edu.mt.